And welcome back to Consumer Choice Radio, broadcasting here on the Big Talker, 106.7 FM and Saga 960 AM in the Peel region, Ontario, Canada. Very delighted to continue on. We've been talking everything DeFi banking. We've been talking crypto regulation. We've heard about all the kooky statements by Senator Warren and many other legislators, lawmakers, and financial regulators. We decided to continue to reach out to the entrepreneurs who are making things happen in the crypto space. And I'm very excited to have the interim CEO and Chief Legal Officer of tZERO, Mr. Alan Konevsky. Mr. Konevsky, Alan, welcome to the program.
Yeah, delighted to be here. Thank you for having us.
All right, let's just go down into it. I'd love to hear about tZERO, but first I want to kind of get the hot news. We've had sort of the SEC chairman has been before Congress. We've had a lot of comments from senators, from regulators, legislators. There's all kinds of spooky, scary stories about how to regulate crypto. We hear it's all about scams. We hear it's all about the little guy getting squeezed out. From your position, someone who's heading up one of these companies, what is a sort of smart approach to dealing with regulation, and what do you think the SEC is missing out on right now?
Yeah, no, thank you. And look, tZERO has had a compliance-led approach to the digital space from its inception. We believe that the secular long-term perspective on the digital evolution on DeFi involves working in partnership with our policymakers, with our regulators, with the industry to shape intelligent regulation. I think that's a start point. And I think folks who come at it from a perspective of all or nothing are going to missing the point to your question. So the right answer here, and the answer that you want to hear as an innovator in this space for the long term, is intelligent regulation. So when Chairman Gensler talks about themes like that, it resonates with us. We agree with it. tZERO has been operating a regulated digital securities trading venue for a number of years. And our approach to digital innovation has been regulation-led. It means we work incrementally, iteratively, step by step, as we advance the industry to sort of the long-term vision of a digitally native, self-regulating value ecosystem that sits on the global signal technology layer where users interact with minimal to no intermediation. But
And I know that a lot of the sort of debate comes on definitions and whether it'll be this regulatory agency or that. And one often looks at securities and whether specific cryptocurrencies or crypto projects can be considered securities. I did see, I believe it was on one of your social media pages, there's a discussion about NFTs and whether they should be considered as securities. If we're to go down the route of intelligent regulation, does that mean that Bitcoin should be a security, should be considered property, like in some European countries? What is sort of the best answer on that?
So a couple of questions. One is, I think Bitcoin, Ethereum, and depending on your perspective, you can add a number of other cryptocurrencies into that topic, including some stable coins, are probably not securities. And even if folks wanted to reopen that debate, at least with respect to Bitcoin and Ethereum, that window has passed. And I think there's secular recognition, including in political and regulatory circles, that at least with respect to Bitcoin and Ethereum, the topic about them being regulated securities or regulated commodities has passed. Now, that same thought process doesn't apply to products that derive their value by reference to Bitcoin and Ethereum. You've seen some of these topics play out with respect to crypto lending products, for example. So where the product itself, there's arguments that are being made by federal and state regulators, is a security. But at least for some crypto, Bitcoin and ETH are good examples. I think the ship on that has sailed, which, by the way, is why there's political conversation in Washington that talks about creating a new regime that would govern, at a minimum, secondary trading type issues around consumer access to these types of instruments. Now, of course, that doesn't apply to everything. And you've heard Chairman Gensler say that he believes that there's a fair number of digital assets out there, including a number of cryptocurrencies, a big number, a little number. It's, that's an open question that he thinks are fall within the definition of a security, as the U.S. Supreme Court handed that down, interpreting U.S. securities laws in 1946. And the same conversation applies to NFTs, where very exciting topic. I think digitization of assets, I have little kids. They probably have more toys now that are virtual than a physical. And that familiarity, that acceptance will continue. I have no reason to think that as adults, for them, it's going to be any different. I still got a bookcase, they won't. And so, I think that, that trend where you talk about this value ecosystem, it's not going to be just stocks and cash. It's going to be assets, and NFTs is another asset. Now, there are some features that make NFTs attractive at scale now, like fractionalizing ownership, like sharing economics creatively, that make them likely a security under the rules as they exist now. And if that's the case, then they have to be issued and traded in the way that securities are. And so that's the direction of travel of these conversations.
You're listening to Consumer Choice Radio. We're speaking with the interim CEO and Chief Legal Officer of tZERO, Alan Konevsky. Alan, if I had another kind of question here, sort of the big new innovative feature of many of the kind of crypto markets is decentralized finance, DeFi. We've spoken with a few other experts on this topic. It's something that we find very fascinating, the ability to have interest-bearing accounts, to be able to do loans, to be able to do all kinds of trading on this. It seems like it's fun. It seems like it's interesting, but it doesn't necessarily fit into the normal pegs of many of the financial instruments that we might have in the US or around the world. What do you sort of see as the way forward for this? Is this something that will take additional regulation? Is this going to be, a couple more 1,000 pages that we discuss under an infrastructure bill? Or is there a simpler way to imagine how we can have safe and intelligent regulation of DeFi and decentralized finance?
No, it's a great question, Alan. Look, I think that part of the challenge, we get really excited by the vision, by the philosophy of DeFi. The same thing applies to digital and blockchain and this universe generally. But it's really hard to regulate philosophy. And so when regulators say that, right, you don't regulate DeFi. You regulate specific products, hyper-specific products and services that come out of that ecosystem. So again, when we talk about this vision of, SEC Commissioner Peirce in a talk that she was giving on the panel a few weeks ago, talked about the quote beauty of the smart contract, the self-regulating, natively digital representation of value, as I mentioned before, that sits on a single technology layer that enables users to interact with products and services with minimal intermediation, right? That's a vision. But what are these specific products and services like, including in DeFi? Particularly products and services that come out of the technological DNA, right? Interest, unlike being a construct of fractional reserve banking and commercial lending in traditional finance, interest to some extent is built into the DNA of cryptocurrencies, right? Staking, right? It's built into, it's built into the foundational functional DNA of how these products work. And so that's very exciting, but there's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? It's hard for people to design specific products and services under regulatory uncertainty and make capital allocation decisions and investment decisions. And it's also hard for regulators to regulate DeFi, right? You can't. It's like, it's metaphysical. So the industry, I think, needs to be better. I've spoken publicly about this before, needs to be better at coming up with specific products, specific use cases, recognizing the uncertainty, recognizing the risk of hindsight guessing by the regulators. and put that in front of them. I think that's a way to unblock that, and that's how you get to intelligent regulation.
So let's talk about tZERO. Obviously, I believe that your ability to stick to the rules and regulations are very stringent. I actually couldn't open up my own account using my mailing address, unfortunately. But I know that there are many different platforms out there. There are many that people have flocked to. Some prefer to just stick with their cold storage and will just buy their crypto on the side. Why is tZERO different? And what do you think are the most prominent kind of use cases for your platform?
First of all, I'm sorry we couldn't have you as a customer. I think our Canadian footprint is a topic that's very important to me, and we've addressed it through partnerships with locally regulated broker dealers on the security side, and we're thinking through our next step in order to have a compliant presence in Canada, both for securities and cryptocurrencies, although the two worlds are very convergent, at least in Canada at this point, at least. I would say that tZERO's focus has been on bringing a holistic user experience across a range of digital assets, leading with digitizing securities, private securities first, public securities to follow. It takes longer to transform public markets, but private securities, public cryptocurrencies, and really providing a holistic user experience, one-stop shopping, no 5 apps, one app, one web interface that enables investors and users to trade and operate across a range of assets, whether they're digital private securities, whether they are cryptocurrencies, whether they're public stocks, whether they're NFTs or at least NFT securities, potentially non-security NFTs as well, whether it's other products and services as we think through this new ecosystem that, again, you talk about DeFi, right? Step by step, the old has to live with the new. And so, when we get to the world vision of a range of products and services and activities operating seamlessly on the global technology layer, sort of like what internet did to data and voice, we have to do that through regulated services and regulated products. But at a minimum, we want to harmonize user access for now. And so that's our priority. But we're not just a B2C company, we're also a B2B company, and we provide tokenization services to issuers. We provide a regulated securities trading platform for broker dealers. We're thinking through our crypto institutional footprint, including on the execution and routing side. And so it's, I don't know what the future is going to look like 5-10 years from now, but I know that the best we can do now is to advance the narrative, advance the political dialogue, operate kind of step by step, rung by rung on the ladder, continue to be compliant, and continue to push the conversations about how much role can technology play, and why technology is as good or better than the intermediated, trust regulated ecosystem that we relied on for decades and centuries, which was fine when it worked, but technology can do it better.
Who would you say are your biggest competitors in the space right now?
Look, I think there are very few folks now that are actively looking at the holistic cross-asset platform. So I'd have to segregate our businesses, right? I can talk about Robinhood on the security side. I can talk about Coinbase on the crypto side. I can talk about companies like Forge and Carta-X on the private security side. But when you really talk about bringing everything together from a consumer perspective, from an institutional perspective, I think what we're doing something is really new and unique and sticky.
Yeah, and I think one interesting part is that tokenization that you were mentioning, because I see that there are a number of companies, and I assume they're publicly listed, but these are private firms that seem to be able to get a token upon your platform. They're able to be sort of converted into a digital security. How does that process work? Are people coming to you with the plans, with the ideas? Is it very difficult to do so? I asked that question because in the normal crypto space, we always preach, decentralization. If a company is interesting in perhaps tokenizing their product or their company themselves, how does that normally work? What's that process like?
Yeah, good question. So, I think it flows through a couple of channels. We have a terrific business development team that is very plugged in with a couple of categories of companies, right? They're late stage private companies that are ripe for secondary liquidity, don't want to go public yet, but are ripe for secondary liquidity. As I mentioned, the private securities liquidity market has been broken for years. And so we're fixing it, and we're fixing it in a way that allows us to leverage blockchain technology. So there are companies like that, then there are innovative companies that just raise capital and want to provide liquidity to the issuers quickly, like Exodus that launched on our platform last week. Very innovative global cryptocurrency wallet services provider. There are other over-the-counter or private companies that have regulatory or other priorities to provide continuous automated liquidity to their investors. Their project sponsors, real estate is a good example, but not the only one, who think they can reduce their cost of funding and cost of capital by not locking up their investors for 5 to 10 years, but allowing them to trade when they can under the regulations. And so there are, a number of pockets across types of industries that our team talks to. I think companies from these circumstances come to us directly. We've signed a number of partnerships, channel partnerships with folks in the industry that serve as a pipeline to us as well. And so the technology we've developed, our tokenization protocol is sort of tech agnostic, and we can operate in blockchain agnostic. We can operate with fairly innovative solutions across a number of chains. The Exodus token that I mentioned is actually has an Ethereum wrapper around an Algorand-based smart contract, and so which is proof, as we kind of you mentioned decentralization, centralization. The starting point of course blockchain and DeFi was decentralization, and so as the industry has been working its way through how do you get from X to Y, recognizing that the steps in between are going to involve some accommodation and some old and new, you've seen centralization, including in organizational centralization with big custodians, right? I mean, most people now hold their crypto with a custodian. Our customers do that. We've made that change recently, as well as other companies in the industry, certainly in the US. And the same thing with technology standards as well. There's sort of gravitation to a couple of leading standards, but there are other innovative chains that are developing, and our focus is to be as evergreen and ever present as we can. And again, the industry will go through a development where you start with philosophy, you figure out how to get to that vision step by step. That may involve some adjustments, including around the centralization concepts and custody and things like that. That we think delivers a better product to our users, at least given under the current environment, as well as the different the evolution of technology protocols as well.
And what I'm kind of guessing and what I'm looking at, having gone through the website, done the research, sort of seen some of the products, in a way, this is sort of a stepping stone for many traditional companies to also kind of get involved in this economy, which I find interesting, while still providing that space for consumers. I would not have been a good researcher without doing my own research here, and all we have to do is go through your CV a little bit. Previously at Mastercard, at Goldman Sachs. What must your former friends and colleagues think about what you're doing now? Are they running scared? Are there other conversations about what's happening in this finance space? What do you kind of see as what you're hearing from some of your former colleagues and people you used to work with?
Look, I love how you phrased the question, Yael, and thank you for doing the research. You said now, right? So when I made the transition in 2018, I think the feedback would have been, more along the lines of, well, what is this ecosystem about exactly? I think we've reached the secular inflection point about the recognition of the power of digital architecture for sort of money 2.0, value 2.0. Mastercard minted an NFT last week, right, and is going to be given away as a promotion. It's wild stuff, and I have tremendous amount of respect for my colleagues and friends, and Mastercard bought CipherTrace, a cybersecurity, crypto-focused company, right? And so that's a tremendous. So people are thinking about, what does it mean from a payments rail perspective, or a product design perspective, or an asset class perspective. So I think the secular recognition of, yeah, this is here, this has potential, not just as an investable or a speculative asset class, but as technology rails and the coins that power those technology rails that are going to transform finance and value, and ultimately how people interact with each other in the more direct, democratic, open, transparent way. That's, so I think folks are not surprised anymore. And whether and how people carve out their niche and relevance, including with private crypto, including with central bank digital currencies. We haven't talked about that, but kind of digitization of fiat money is an area where I think you're going to see a lot of larger institutions participating in some fashion, including banks and payments companies, whether as partnering with the various governments or interacting with that ecosystem in some way. By the way, designing central bank digital currencies, very important project. And one that I support. My two hopes are, one, that when we design it in the US, or when you guys design it in Canada, you do so recognizing the values of your society, including with respect to privacy and freedom and these other kinds of things that really need to be taken into account super seriously when you think about central bank digital currencies, because that's a very powerful tool. And number two, that private cryptos coexist with that ecosystem. And so, but how big companies carve out their niches and relevance here, you're going to see them develop it, but I don't think anyone is laughing anymore.
Yeah, definitely. And I should clarify, I'm still a U.S. citizen, so I'm still paying all those taxes and paying as the Federal Reserve prints out. But one, I guess if I could almost push back on that, looking at particularly the central banks, making some kind of digital version of the currency, in a way, we've had this independence of the Federal Reserve from the Congress. This is sort of how things were set up, over 100 years ago. And now many politicians have grown very reliant upon the ability of the Fed to lend out money, to print money. And we're going to go through this conversation throughout the next couple of weeks about raising the debt ceiling. Do you not see some danger as well? And I understand that you're following the regulations, and I'm more apt to criticize many who would be in the political or financial elite. But do you not see sort of a problem area to where if there are digital currencies that are sort of held and owned by the central banks, that we are basically have to use those? Do you not see that there would be an issue when it comes down to the ability to save, that essentially this would just be a way to continue inflation on and we wouldn't really have a hedge against it?
I agree that. So I think whether and how it might impact the government's ability to handle monetary policy differently or fiscal policy different is an open. I think the government can do a lot now with kind of traditional fractional reserve system to inflate and deflate economies, and so whether or not central bank digital currencies are going to make that, are going to impact that. that's a separate question. I think, from the direction of travel that you're coming from, the government is sort of there already, and they can do a lot. And so it's going to give them added tools in terms of transparency and control, which is why I said when you're designing central bank digital currencies, and I agree with you, very sensitive, very important topic. You got to design it keeping in mind the values of your society, because the amount of transparency, insight, control over economy at a microscopic level. You've talked about macro topics, right? Inflating or deflating the monetary supply, interacting with the banking system, et cetera. This allows government and regulators to interact in real time with the economy at a micro level without having to flow through the regulated intermediaries like banks and others that the government does, including through the Federal Reserve System in the United States, and so or broker dealers or other regulated intermediaries. So that's where I think the challenge lies, to ensure that the system doesn't introduce a level of control that is not consistent with us as a society.
That's what I wanted to hear. They can't have that too much control. We've had enough of that throughout around. All right, I'd love to ask more questions, but this is radio, and we have to kind of cue it over to the sponsors. So I do have to thank Mr. Alan Konevsky, Interim CEO and Chief Legal Officer at tZERO. Alan, thanks so much for coming on the radio program.
Thank you for having me.